Hey random stranger! So today we're on to season 2 of Fate Zero, episodes 9 and 10, basically continuing our dive into what I can only describe as an increasingly hellish pit of tragedy and moral complexities and just generally the ugly side of humanity. So yeah, good times ahead. Just to refresh our memories, at the start of Ep 7, Irisville was like in a bad way. Her body was continuing to break down and she essentially said her last words to Kiritsugu as she returned Avalon, which is Excalibur's sheath, to him. I always thought it was interesting that the sheath shares its name with the island where King Arthur was supposedly taken to after he was fatally wounded at the Battle of Camlin. So in medieval and later modern texts, Avalon really came to symbolize a mythical place of healing and rest, which is definitely something Kiritsugu needs and probably has rejected many times in his life. And so in returning Avalon to him, beyond the physical healings and the protective properties of the sheath, it felt like Ari was really saying to him, you need this more than I do. Like, you need rest for not just your body, but your mind and your soul after everything you've been through. Because in contrast, like, Irisville is content. She was happy to live and to love and to be loved and to even have a family, which she never thought would be possible in her status as an Einsman homunculus. And I have to say, I think that there is actually genuine love between Kiritsugu and Irisville. Like, I see their relationship as a profound meeting of two very, very different souls. You know, one characterized by naivete and purity of heart, but also a clear-sightedness as to what really matters in life. And the other hardened by this very pragmatic cynicism. And yet they managed to find each other and found meaning and solace in one another. I just find the relationship so beautiful. Like, ultimately, they were united in their desire to bring about a better world for their daughter, Ilya, even though they came at it from two very different perspectives. So I know I'm always going on about how much I love Sabari, but I honestly think Irisville and Kiritsugu, despite the killing and the moral ambiguities and all of that, have also shown that they are some true relationship goals. Right after Kiritsugu sort of outlined his plan to kill Tokiyomi, I kind of spent some time thinking about what Maiya might have meant when she said that he finally looked like his old self. Based on what Maiya said to him when she died, I think that her seeing him return to that clinical, strategic mode of thinking was very reassuring to her. Because lately Kiritsugu's been having these moments where his emotionless and like all business exterior was kind of breaking down a bit. His smug snarkiness towards Saber, his sadness over what's happening to Irisville. For Maiya, who is so accustomed to Kiritsugu's cold, unbreakable, efficient approach to their work, seeing him go back to this purely operational mindset signaled to her that he was back in his element and just doing his job rather than potentially being distracted by all these emotions and all of these moral questions that he's had to sort of cover over layer by layer. I don't feel like we've really talked about Maiya enough. Maiya herself I see her as a really tragic figure. All she had known was this brutality of living and poverty and just endless conflict and also the life of a child soldier, as if all of that wasn't enough. Like Kiritsugu, she had grown emotionless and turned into this mechanized killer through just like the natural attrition of her emotions. Like, how else are you going to protect yourself other than to turn into someone like her? So it was almost like she was custom made, really, to work for Kiritsugu. And she clearly connected to his vision to get rid of the conflict that had ruined her childhood and her life. So in a sense, I see Maiya and Kiritsugu as these kindred spirits in that both had been traumatized and stripped of their humanity by a cruel, cruel world. But a key difference, I think, is that Maiya lacked Kiritsugu's privileged upbringing and the agency that also allowed him to choose his own path. Whereas Kiritsugu's descent into ruthless, pragmatic killing was the result of him choosing to pursue justice against first his dad and then the entire world and everyone else who he thought had perverted the course of justice. Maiya's transformation into a killer was born out of pure, unavoidable circumstances and this instinct for survival. She had no choice, really, but to become a killer. She was simply a product of the cycle of conflict and of suffering that had consumed her childhood. That's not to say that Kiritsugu's situation wasn't tragic either, but if we were to compare the degree to which Kiritsugu and Maiya could each chart their own course and their life trajectory, I reckon Maiya definitely got the short end of that stick. As for Irisville, while she's just straight up admitted that she lacks the direct lived experience of the injustice that Kiritsugu is trying to change, her motivations, I feel, for helping him were no less genuine. Yes, she has been sheltered her whole life, and she fully acknowledged that her comprehension of the pain and the horrors of the world was effectively secondhand and all filtered through Kiritsugu's own experiences. But she knows enough to understand the immense emotional and psychological toll that Kiritsugu's actions have had on him. And recognizing that, Irisville made a conscious choice to present herself as being on the same page as Kiritsugu, even if she maybe wasn't as deeply invested as he was. And by doing that, she gave him the reassurance and support that he needed to continue on that path, which, when you stop and think about it, is kind of incredible. Irisville has this weird double nature to her. Like, on the one hand, yes, she has not been exposed as the humans have, but on the other hand, she also possesses this much deeper level of understanding of what humans need and what humans should aspire to. I would also say that her underlying innocence allowed her to overlook Kiritsugu's moral ambiguities and the compromises that he had to make on this journey towards justice. Her role, as she accepted it, was to be a beacon of comfort for him. And if that took believing that his intentions, if not always his methods, were fundamentally noble and righteous, then so be it. At the same time, Irisville's motivation to help Kiritsugu and Saber to win the Grail War does involve some pretty high personal stakes. It was never about reaching the root for her, but rather this desire to be the last Ainsburn homunculus to become the vessel for the Holy Grail. It was about securing a future where her daughter won't have to be sacrificed for this war and can fully live out her life as a human being would. This is something Neo and Kaiser explained really well. They wrote, "It's interesting how Irisville states that she never understood Kiri's ideal, but right after this she reveals her own dream of a peaceful life for Ilya, which feels like a scaled-down version of what Kiritsugu wants for all humanity." You could say she doesn't really get the grand nature of his aim or the ability to think on such a scale, but she definitely does understand the appeal of what he's aiming for. Perhaps she just doesn't see this in herself because of how self-deprecating she is due to her homunculus origin and the mindset of, I've already got more than I could ever hope for. Yeah, the thought of Irisville, and it makes total sense, that she is kind of playing down her understanding of humanity's woes and Kiritsugu's drive to make the world better is actually really touching. She may not feel like she's a part of this world, but she's definitely sacrificed enough and has become invested enough to care on a level that perhaps previous homunculuses weren't ever expected to be able to care. In some, Iris feels like the sweetest, most empathetic character in Fate. And when Maiya said that she doesn't think there will be a role for her in this new world that Kiritsugu is building in which there is no conflict, Iris was like, no, you gotta get yours, girl. Like, you gotta find your family again. You need to live again. Everything she knows she won't be able to experience herself personally, she wishes it upon the people that she cares about. And I love that about Arisville. Unfortunately, that was probably the last wholesome conversation we'll ever get between Maiya and Arisville, because fake Ryder, who was really Berserker, busted in and fatally injured her. Saber arrived too late to save the day, and so she gave chase. And then we saw Kiritsugu, for the second time, have a tender conversation with someone whom he loves and who loves him back. Kiritsugu may be incapable of conventional expressions of love, but what does that matter? You know, I think beneath his icy exterior, he clearly also deeply cared for Maiya, enough to shed tears for her. Maiya's last words to him was to remind Kiritsugu that they are so close to winning. She knew that the cold, calculating facade that he so often puts on was just that. It's just a facade. It's a bloody strong one, but still, deep down, he still has this tenderness that cares for people, the same one that had surfaced when he broke down after killing Natalia, and that he was showing right in this very moment. Now, given Kirei, his arch enemy, possesses an immunity against any emotion, let alone this sort of tenderness that Kiritsugu has, I think Maiya recognized that Kiritsugu's susceptibility to emotion could end up being used as a weapon against him. So whereas Kiritsugu's ruthless actions are often tempered by an underlying compassion, Kirei is utterly unencumbered by guilt and in fact revels in the suffering of others. It's this capacity for genuine feeling, like no matter how deep he buries it, that distinguishes Kiritsugu from Kirei in particular and makes him vulnerable in ways that his enemy could never be. Meanwhile, Wave is just hiding out in the forest, arguing with Ryder over Japanese food because he had figured out that Ryder had spent a huge amount of mana on the Ionian heteroi without telling him, and that he needed time to heal. Waver, he has just always felt like he's got something to prove, both to the mage world that dismisses him as this lowborn upstart, and also to Ryder himself. You know, he's always thought of himself as the weak link in their partnership. Even though Ryder has been really cool in reassuring Waver that it's not all about power, Waver has already earned his respect by having these bigger than his head ambitions that far outstrips his current abilities. And it really reminds Ryder of his own drive as a king to push the boundaries of the world and to conquer the unknown. But in this important moment of character development, there was a hint of regret when Ryder mentioned how Oceanus, like the Grail, may not even exist. The reason that King Alexander pushed his men so hard, according to legend, at the cost of many of their lives, was that he believed that Oceanus was a thing. So this realization that they had probably died chasing an illusion seemed to really trouble Ryder and raised the question of whether the cost of his ambition was worth their sacrifice. His message to Waver was basically, if you're going to sacrifice your life, you had better be damn sure that it's for something greater than a mere hunch, or even for something as small as personal glory. So after all this, I was like, great, you know, Ryder has suddenly had a light flick on in his head, and he's starting to realize that his legend may not be all that it is. But that's why I still don't get why he has this persistent fixation on teaching Saber a lesson. Like, he continues to patronize Saber for her supposedly failing to properly inspire her people by dreaming big and doing whatever the hell that she wants, and, you know, being like overly constrained by her moral code and her perceived duty to her people and her nation. So I've said it before and I'll say it again. Like, I really don't buy Ryder's criticism of Saber, particularly as he just effectively admitted to potentially leading his own men on a wild goose chase. Saber may be flawed in that she clings to the idea of honor a bit too dearly at the expense of common sense, and sometimes in direct contradiction to her desire to win the Grail. But Ryder did plenty wrong as a ruler as well. His unrelenting drive to push the boundaries of his own conquests led to him sacrificing the lives of countless of his followers in pursuit of what he admitted to be an illusory goal. In light of that, his big talk about embodying what the people want kind of smells like bullshit. Like, my personal take is that his push towards Oceanus was never really about what the people wanted. It was about persuading them to disregard their own desires in service of his own personal ambitions, and doing that by making them think that they wanted what he wanted, if that makes sense. Compare that to Saber, whose power and noble phantasm comes from being the literal embodiment of all of humanity's hopes and dreams. We've discussed before, like especially after the King's Banquet, we can be generous and argue that Ryder and Saber each represent leadership styles that suited their respective eras. You know, Ryder's aggression or King Alexander's aggression fit an age of empire expansion versus Saber's duty-bound defense of a vulnerable nation that was under attack. But ultimately, I feel like the contradictions in Ryder's own conduct undermines the validity of his criticisms of Saber. Like, until he can fully reckon with the costs of his own reckless ambition, just feel like his moralizing towards Saber rings really hollow and is more than a bit unconvincing. Berserker. Berserker's existence is just like this pure manifestation of unadulterated rage. He is this shadowy figure that's haunting Kariya and sustained seemingly solely by his hatred of Saber. Put that together with the way that Berserker described himself as this dark reflection cast by the light of a heroic spirit, it suggests that he is a servant who has quite a complex, tumultuous history with King Arthur. I still think the most likely candidate for who Berserker is Lancelot. You know, the infamous knight who betrayed King Arthur by having an affair with his wife Guinevere. In most versions of the story, that betrayal led to civil war and absolute chaos, and ultimately to King Arthur's death on the battlefield. It's kind of interesting to interpret Berserker's fury as rooted in the profound conflict between the good and evil that can be found in every single human being. If we run with that theory that Berserker used to be Lancelot, that kind of makes a lot of sense. Lancelot was known for his unwavering loyalty, but he was also capable of the most treacherous acts. For instance, he killed some of Arthur's knights, some of whom were unarmed, which is like an absolute no-no in the chivalric code, for the sake of saving Guinevere. It was part of this whole fallout of his affair with her. And that conflict between Lancelot's moral goodness versus his base desires, and how sometimes the latter would win over the former, must have tormented him as a knight who supposedly and who genuinely did want to follow the honorable code. Berserker also seems to harbor deep resentment towards the enduring legacy of King Arthur, whose heroism and legend have lived on, while Lancelot is now probably most well known for his betrayal and affair with Guinevere, when he also did a lot of honorable deeds on the side. So lucky for Kariya, he gets to become the vessel through which this centuries-old boiling rage can finally explode. Maybe it's this mutual feeding off each other's rage, because Kariya himself has plenty of rage to act as fuel as well. You know, rage against his father, his lot in life, and his unrequited love. So in a lot of ways, he's quite similar and quite similarly situated as Lancelot. Before we get to the darker aspects of Kariya's character that I actually think makes him just as awful as some of the other quite clearly reprehensible figures in Fate, it's important to recognize the profound powerlessness that defines his predicament. Kariya is in many ways a tool, just a tool through which others pursue their own desires and schemes. First among them, of course, is Zouken, who not only conscripted Kariya into the Grail War, but enjoys Kariya's misery throughout the entire process. We saw that when Zouken force-fed Kariya a worm that itself had fed on Sakura, the implications of which are too terrible to dwell on, and we'll just move on. The irony, of course, and the source of Zouken's twisted joy was in forcing Kariya to become a part of Sakura's suffering when he had explicitly joined the war in the first place to alleviate her of that suffering. Okay, so back to that whole wagon chase. By pure luck, the real Rider and Waver just happened to be flying overhead. So Saber started chasing them down by very impressively suffusing her motorbike with her mana. And that triggered Rider's, I don't know what you call it, competitive streak. And I do have to respect his willingness to smooth things out with a race rather than a fight. Except that when he saw that he wouldn't win, he played dirty and just brought an avalanche down using the spikes on his chariot. Something Saber herself would never do, of course, because of her coat. So I thought Rider was making a slightly heavy-handed allusion to the fact that sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to achieve your goals. And Saber's inflexibility in that respect really disadvantages her. But you know what? Saber just plowed on through, and I felt like that was her way of standing up to Rider's incessant shit throwing. Saber found out that they weren't the ones who had taken Irisville. Meanwhile, Kiritsugu had already figured out that it was the Mators working together with Kirei who had. My guess is that as soon as Kiritsugu found that out, his blood would definitely have just run cold, you know, because Kirei continues to be this frightening specter to Kiritsugu. And honestly, I would not be surprised if when they actually meet face to face to fight it out, Kiritsugu might just freeze up. I would not be surprised at all. Rider decided to make one last final stand against Saber. And again, I'm just amazed like how he has this incredibly grandiose view of himself as a leader who conquers souls by inspiring them to dream big. Like that's the selling point. From that perspective, he very generously offered to extend to Saber the respect of seeing her as a great fighter, but just not a great king. Again, I just feel like this view of himself as a brilliant leader who galvanizes his people and inspires them really doesn't acknowledge the whole truth or the darker truths of Alexander's rule. I think we already mentioned this, but in his pursuit of conquest, he forced his men to keep pushing onwards eastward into India, I believe, and to keep fighting even when they didn't want to anymore, to the point where they rebelled. That is at least on par with the weaknesses that characterized Saber's reign. Also, Saber was no less of an inspiration to her people in their time of need, when they needed someone to defend them, and also to future generations who looked to King Arthur as a symbol of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Which is why I was just kind of like shaking my head when, after he'd lost to Saber and her Excalibur, Rider still refused to like waste any more effort on Saber because I assume he still didn't deem her worthy enough as an opponent that is on equal footing with him. I honestly do not think he has much of a justification for thinking that, but that's just how he is. I knew as soon as we found out that Kirei was working with Kariya that it was just going to be a total dumpster fire. Kirei had Kariya exactly where he wanted him. He toyed with him in a way kind of like how my dog used to toy with little ants on the ground before squishing them. It's also worth noting how Kirei is hugely abusing his power as the new overseer of the Grail War, especially when he has at his disposal an effectively infinite number of command spells he can use himself or he can gift to others. Meanwhile, Berserker's noble phantasm shed more light on the nature of his existence. Beyond the theory that he is the disgraced knight Lancelot, it turns out Berserker is also kind of this counterfeit heroic spirit, which is really interesting. He can shapeshift to emulate the likeness of other legit heroes, even as he despises the fact that none of their glory truly belongs to him. So maybe Berserker is a composite of past figures who were close to or who kind of brushed up against other legendary heroes only to fall short themselves for one reason or another. And that includes all of those whose reputations were tarnished or who never quite achieved the recognition that they craved or that was comparable to other heroes. So Berserker's rage-filled form is really a manifestation of all of those unfulfilled ambitions and perhaps even a healthy degree of jealousy. His ability to mimic the forms of other heroic spirits is like a metaphor for the very hollow nature of his existence and for the fates of those who are doomed forever to trail in the footsteps or in the shadows of those whose glory and honor they can only ever imitate but never equal. Kirei promised Kariya the Grail, but also, and probably more important for Kariya, a meeting with Tokiyomi and another chance at vengeance. The best, or I don't know, the most awful thing, depending on how you look at it, thing about this scene was Zouken calling out Kirei for being just as much of a grubby maggot who feasts on others' suffering as he is, even if, or maybe especially if, the people that they're torturing are family. Kirei's very negative reaction to Zouken's call out showed that he's oddly not yet reconciled with the grotesqueness of his own character. The fact that we have not just one, but two characters who can bond over their insatiable appetite for human tragedy, with like the older one mentoring or more goading the younger one into fully realizing his depravity, is amazing and just so terrible and so disturbing. But I am glad that this scene confirmed Kirei's trajectory. You know, he really is just a younger Mato Zouken. And then we ended with this horrific scene that was horrific for so many different reasons. Kariya walked in clearly intending to kill Tokiyomi. He was instead confronted with Tokiyomi's corpse and also the sudden appearance of Aoi, who coincidentally happened to be there and saw him standing over her husband's dead body. After this episode, I think it was made clear that Kariya's motivations were less about exacting righteous justice against Tokiyomi and more about his own bitter envy and resentment. He seemed to rage against Tokiyomi for having the very things that Kariya desperately wanted for himself, like a loving family, a legacy, and of course, Aoi. And that is a far less noble underlying driver than we were initially led to believe that he had for fighting this war. Of course, he probably also felt like he was rightly holding Tokiyomi responsible for being so cruel as to give away one of his own daughters to Zouken. But it was actually masterful how this scene deconstructed our previous conception of Kariya's intentions. Previously, he seemed like a tragic but a well-meaning kind of guy who wanted to make a horrible situation less horrible. He seemed to genuinely care for Aoi and the girls, and he wanted to do what he could to negotiate with Zouken to save Sakura to the point of sacrificing his own well-being and his life. But Aoi's accusations and Kariya's subsequent violent assault/murder, I think, of her really shattered that narrative. The surface of righteous intention was just brutally stripped away, revealing this underlying toxicity of Kariya's selfish obsession and resentment. We should break down the accusations that Aoi threw at Kariya before he lost control, because to me they were this weird mix of both unfair and also totally warranted grievances. So on the one hand, Aoi expressed anger over the loss of Sakura, which clearly was not Kariya's doing, given it was an arrangement between Tokiyomi and Zouken. I think in her shock and grief, she understandably lumped Kariya in with the Mato family. After all, Zouken took Sakura, and then Kariya killed Tokiyomi, and the Matos as a collective have ruined her life. But it was odd, because why did Aoi direct her anger over Sakura more towards the Matos and not at Tokiyomi, who had been obviously the key player in sending their daughter away. We could speculate that Aoi had already had it out with Tokiyomi when the decision was made. Like maybe she did harbor anger at Tokiyomi, but he's dead now. So where else would she direct her rage but at the Mato standing right in front of her and who she thought had also just killed Tokiyomi? But a part of me is also inclined to believe, even though I don't have any evidence to support this, kind of just a gut instinct, that Aoi has been conditioned to trust and to submit to Tokiyomi's judgment, particularly when it came to matters of securing the family legacy and ensuring their daughters had equal opportunities to become powerful mages. It's like he knows best in that department. At the same time, I felt like she just needed someone to blame for losing one of her daughters. The reason that Zouken needed an heir was because Kariya had run away from his duties. Although, given how the worm magic works, I don't think you could blame him really for doing that. So Aoi's accusations, although partially misplaced, reflected the depth of her anguish and her need to find a target for her resentment at this whole situation. Unfortunately, Kariya was conveniently within firing range and had been found in a super compromising position, all according to Kirei's plans, even if Tokiyomi's role in the decision regarding Sakura was equally, if not more, culpable. Aoi also accused Kariya of not understanding anything and of never having loved anyone, which really set him off. That suggested, at least from Aoi's perspective, that there were some very complex factors at play in her choice to be with Tokiyomi and in her relationship with Tokiyomi that went beyond simple love that Kariya could never understand. Choosing to marry Tokiyomi may have been, or most definitely was, motivated more by duty and obligation to family than any sort of personal desire or attraction. And in the same vein, even though it obviously hurt her to lose a daughter to someone as disgusting and cruel as Zouken, Aoi probably knew and accepted that Tokiyomi ultimately did that out of love as well. Here's a perspective from Thomas. I think a big problem with Kariya is that he always thought that Aoi needs to be saved from the Torasaka family, that she's essentially a hostage in her own family, that deep down she must be terrified of Tokiyomi, that she must be pretending that she's all right with being a mage's wife because she's afraid of her husband, but also because she loves her children. But she must be waiting for a savior to get rid of Tokiyomi and save her and her daughters. That's what Kariya had to believe in order to be the hero. He couldn't fathom Aoi wanting this life, caring about Tokiyomi and not thinking about Kariya more deeply. Maybe he thought that even if Aoi does care about Tokiyomi, she must realize how foolish that was of her after Kariya saved her from him. He wanted to be the rebellious hero, willing to die to save the damsel from the clutches of the evil mage. So when it was revealed that the damsel chose to be with the evil mage, although it might have been an arranged marriage, it wouldn't surprise me, that him giving up on his life was in vain, as far as Aoi is concerned. And it just completely broke him. Fantastic explanation. I wholeheartedly agree. I think finding out Aoi could have wholeheartedly and out of her own free will chosen to be with Tokiyomi and didn't actually need the savior that he thought he was being was the final straw that broke Kariya. I do wonder if Aoi knew of Kariya's infatuation with her. In fact, I think it very likely that she did. But this was clearly a one-sided love, and like love in quotation marks. And despite Kariya's belief that he would have sacrificed everything for Aoi's sake, you know, enduring the torment of his father and the worm magic in order to save her daughter and bring her back her happiness, all of that supposed selfless love for her was completely undermined by the contempt that he displayed when Aoi failed to validate those emotional claims. Clearly, this was not an unconditional love for Kariya. So I wonder, when Aoi said that Kariya had never even loved anyone, if she had also sensed that sort of possessive, toxic nature of Kariya's love for her and contrasted that with the more dutiful, restrained love that both she and Tokiyomi had for each other and for their family. she could have been calling out Kariya's motivations and how they were more about his own needs and desires and fantasies rather than a genuine concern for her or her family's well-being. Here's this great overview from Ani Nikaido, kind of just reviewing all of Kariya's previous actions in light of this episode, which is also what I did as I was watching these episodes, and reevaluating whether he might have had twisted motivations from the start. Right from the start of the show, I was rallying behind Kariya. Me too, kind of. He had the noblest goal. He saved Rin, he stuck it up to Tokiomi, and then this happened. The thing about this event isn't that Kariya killed a powerless victim. The thing about it is that it recontextualized his entire character to me. Snapping at your object of affection for not recognizing your love is something that's been brought to attention quite a lot in recent culture with all the nice guy memes. And if we stop looking at Kariya as someone who is rightfully angry at a parent who put their child through misery, and instead start looking at him as a nice guy, things start looking bad for him. And then they kind of go through a very substantial list of signs that Kariya's intentions weren't as noble as he made them out to be, and that, scarily enough, also that maybe Kariya himself didn't even realize that he harbored these more malicious, selfish intentions. So they continue, the Holy Grail War gave him an excuse to exercise quite possibly his darkest fantasy and kill Tokiomi, and you can bet he never even gave a damn about how his success would make Aoi feel. At the end of the day, he killed Aoi for having the exact type of emotional response you'd expect her to have, because Kariya doesn't really care about her, he just wanted to steal Tokiomi's place. And then I do think Kariya genuinely cared for both Sakura and Aoi, yet a combination of being given power, freedom to kill, and a reason to openly antagonize Tokiomi, plus all the pain he went through, ended up leading to this. As much as I'd like to say Kariya was always a monster, I don't truly believe that, and I applaud the show for its moral complexity. Yeah, that's some very good points made about how Kariya came to this point after a whole bunch of awful things had happened. And it was just the most awful, perfect lining up of motive, opportunity, and just all around suffering that then led to this. Nothing says toxic obsession more than demanding that the other person validate your expressions of love, as was the point made in that comment. And when they don't, to punish them. In this case, assault and strangulation. Kariya's response cast a shadow over everything he's ever done in the past. Even if his initial intentions had been good, they had been thoroughly poisoned at this point by his possessive, murderous behavior, and also his lack of consideration for Aoi's desires, and his single-minded focus on satisfying his own need for validation and for gratification. So if we learn nothing else from Kariya's tragic arc, it is to know the difference between true love and then a debilitating, sort of self-destructive obsession. Kariya's actions, driven by a warped notion of what love is and a lack of awareness that love can look different from person to person, really led him down this path of ruin. Also, as some of you mentioned, by this point, Kariya's mental faculty. Also, some of you mentioned that at this point, Kariya's mental faculties have been severely compromised, either by the parasitic worms that are consuming him from the inside out, or the depths of his depression into which he had sunk. And while that in no way excuses his abhorrent behavior, it is an important additional contextual factor for understanding his actions. The fact that Kariya didn't even attempt to explain himself to Aoi, or to clarify that he'd been set up by someone, or to express the shock that he must have felt in the face of Aoi's understandable emotional breakdown and accusations, was a clear indication again that he just wasn't all there, and that he has been breaking down mentally and physically for a very long time. The only winners in this whole debacle were, of course, Archer, and most of all, Kirei. And it's clear that his appetite for the misery of others will only continue to grow and to mature. And given enough time, it could eventually surpass the twisted tastes of Zouken himself, although it's very hard to imagine that. I don't think there's any deeper meaning or lesson to be drawn from this other than it's just really freaking scary when someone is unfettered by any sort of conscience or empathetic feeling with their fellow human beings. I do wonder if Archer will ever look over at Kirei, this monster that he effectively created, and feel a slight chill run down him. Probably not, because, he sees all humans as dogs anyway, and Kirei at the end of the day is a human. But wouldn't it be such a table flip if Kirei somehow found a way to turn his depraved sense of entertainment onto Archer? I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibility for some reason, given his status as Archer's master. Fate Zero Season 2 Episode 9. Here we go in 3, 2, 1, play. Waver. Part of me still thinks he is one of the purer characters or masters. And then I remember that he's actually scamming these two innocent old people. Yes, because he's like, it's actually really sad. Yeah, maybe I need to take back that statement about Waver being one of the purer characters. It's everyone has their dark spots, their blind spots, which is one of the things that I really appreciate about Fate. Even Saber, who is supposedly the standard bearer for all that is good and just. Even she has, makes certain decisions that aren't the best for those around her and may not actually jive with her stated purpose of, achieving justice. So, we're so close. I'm not even going to try and predict who might win the war. Given traditional narrative structure, it really should be Kiritsugu, but they might pull a fast one on us, and who knows, Kirei could emerge victorious, and it's just one anarchical, nihilistic end, It'd be freezing. He feels bad, doesn't he? Did we ever cover what happened to their their actual grandson? Wait, our real grandchildren. Ah, nice. Not so bamboozled after all. He's so calm about it though. That's just the perks of age. Waiver? Ah, okay. I reinstate that statement about Waiver being pure. It's just too nice. Oh, so he's just playing along for the sake of his wife. That actually, it's still sad though, just thinking that he got discovered because he was too nice compared to the real grandson. This lullaby, wholesome music. Hmm. It's kind of like Ryder's advice to him, but one step further. Ryder's like, there's very few things that's worth risking your life for because you don't really know if they are. But then his grandfather's like, nah, once you get to a certain age, you're like, why not just enjoy life? Nothing's worth your life. Just total opposite philosophy to Kiritsugu. I don't know. I feel like Kiritsugu needs to take some space. I feel like his mind is going further and further into the dark. Why don't you work with Saber? Just doesn't have that trust with them. Isn't that a waste? They are not in a good space. Just woman. Oh man. His voice is something else. I don't know. Yeah, I was like, he's gonna get off on that. Oh no. Okay, so Kirei still hasn't figured out like what Kiritsugu is really like. I mean, for one, he would never do that to Irisville. Is to destroy you. Oh, I mean, should she be telling him that? It's so weird that I actually kind of agree with Kirei. So weird. I guess the truth lies somewhere in between Kirei and Kiritsugu. Like, you can't create a perfect world, nor does the world have to be totally nihilistic, with only conflict in it. Oh, God. Is he gonna turn her into a watermelon head? Oh no. Oh, oh my. But what about the Grail? No. I knew that she was gonna die, but I didn't know she was gonna die then. It's too soon. I'm pissed. His babies need their sleep. So Saber. Saber's still going. Kirei, what are you up to? Huh? It's not Kirei. I love how this just goes on in like a normal, quiet suburban neighborhood. Hmm? Well, but wait, is that how that works though? Like, does it give them some extra boost? Is my question. Uh, Waver, what are you doing? uh, yep, just a crisis of identity and just self confidence issues. It's like you're free of me now. He doesn't want to be like a liability in this fight. Oh my god. That's so cute. That smile. Oh my gosh, there's one final bro moment. Yeah, he's gonna die. Ryder's definitely dying. I mean, I guess they're riding to their deaths with no regrets. They've got everything out in the open. They see each other as equals, as friends. Left nothing on the table. This is the way to do it, I guess. Who knows? Maybe power of friendship will win over like what Kitsugu and Saber have, which is absolute distrust, and Kirei, who's just psychopathic and berserker. It's to destroy Kiritsugu. Hmm. Because there is something that he wants, even though he says that he doesn't want anything. Because otherwise he wouldn't have been allowed to join the Grail War, I guess. I still don't know about these two. I'm like, is it how much longer will their partnership last? Oh, Iris here. Oh, whoa, oh, where is she? Oh no. I hate little hands. Ah, that is the worst fate ever. And it happened to the most undeserving person. Yes, I know technically she's not a person, but she earned the right to be the equivalent of human. Oof, those weird dissonant chords. Oh, such creepy music. Uh, who was that at the end? Was that her or was that her daughter, Ilya? Oh, man. I hate that. Well, it's fate, so I guess it should be expected, but the way that they set up Irisville to be like everyone around her who sees her except Kiritsugu and then Saber, they call her things like the doll or the homunculus, the grail holder woman, Kirei. It's very dehumanizing because of the fact that she isn't technically human, but also is that really the only thing that determines one's humanity just because you weren't born human or you know, you don't have certain other characteristics that humans have. One's humanity, I think, can be earned or determined by the extent to which you care for others or have dreams and have ideals, which Irisville had in spades. So the fact that in the end she was, I guess, drawn into the Grail and restored back, you know, to her former form. I don't know, and just became one with the sludge again, like all of the with all just having to face the fate that all of the previous homunculi had to was really sad. And I don't know if at the end, when the Grail is finally won, whether she will be released or whether it's kind of too late at this point. I think we should just move right on to episode 10. So if you guys are good, let's do it in 3, 2, 1, play. Also, don't you think that at this point, Kariya just wants to die? I mean, he's already lost Aoi, and not just Aoi, but her respect of him. Oh, so showdown between writer and archer? Will Saber come in and join Ryder? It's one ancient against another very, very ancient. Why? Why? This is just classic Saber, just stepping into a trap. How many times has this happened now? Uh, First with Caster, I think that was at least twice, and then now with Berserker. The people who are obsessed with her basically always find a way to entrap her, and she just walks right into it. I don't know. Maybe it's like a combination of naivete, of just not thinking that someone would lay a trap. I don't know. I'm pretty sure she knows that they would, but maybe it's also she's like, I have Excalibur. I can deal with anything that I walk into. But still, that sort of bravado. I mean, is it good? Is it maybe something she should tone down a bit? Arisville, every time I see her, I'm just sad. I'm just sad now. I think if Kiritsugu wins, I think she'll know at the very least, and in that way, be at rest. You know, if Kirei brags to Kiritsugu what he did to Arisville, I'm sure it will fire up Kiritsugu even more, which could be a plus in their showdown. D- One of those sentences that don't make sense, but it actually does. Okay, so maybe the command seals do boost their mana or in some way. One final appeal is like, do you want to sign up? Do you want to bend the knee? Oh, it's interesting that he'd mentioned his friend, whose name I've forgotten, but the one from the legends. Oh man, are we gonna lose Ryder like now? Waiver. Waiver. He's still a kid at the end of the day. He has so much faith in the command seals, but yeah, they're no insurance against defeat. Hmm. Well, I don't know why. I feel like all this build up showing all of his great armies, and he's going to get cut down with like one move from Archer. Just to highlight the tragedy that he never stood a chance against Archer. Oh, God. I hope I'm wrong. We're not going to have any moments of downtime from now on, aren't we? It's just going to be all intense fights. Ooh. Damn. Using like automatic weapon. I don't know. Not much sympathy for you, Kariya. Oh, it is so sad. Oh my god. Just making another promise he won't be able to keep. Okay, does the internal rage in Kariya actually fuel Berserker's power? Or does it inhibit? Maybe it's kind of like a big boost, but then it's not sustainable. I don't know. Does the internal emotion of a master, is it connected to the servant's like performance? That's so cool. Yay. You know, it's, yeah, I guess because Lancer, King Arthur, the relationship they had, he knows all her secrets, maybe. It's good to see the fire alarm system working. Maybe she can just talk to him, talk him down. You know, invoke the code. Smart. I mean, I don't know if Saber's doing it because she's smart or because she really believes in the chivalric code. Arendite. Okay, I guess it's Arendite. I don't. Oh, okay. Oh, it's another name. Oh. Ooh, that one shot of her just walking coldly away. Regrets, man. Oh no, I don't think she can fight him now, properly knowing who he is. Do not lower your sword. Uh, okay. Well, I still don't agree with that whole she never led them or showed them, you know, the ideals to which they could aspire to. Because Lancelot, that was the whole affair thing, right? Like, I mean, they have their own free will. I don't know. Maybe I might be missing something. Oh, it's breaking the matrix. Yep, this is Archer's brand of satisfaction and entertainment, just like crushing someone's dreams. uh, armies, all the armies are gone. Oh. Oh, yep. Mm. Well. Oh man. Yep, Ryder's gotta be feeling it now. Like that all that stuff he was saying about how he led his men on a wild goose chase. Maybe and was like questioning whether it was worth it. He's gotta be feeling it even more now. An anti-world noble phantasm. I mean, at least Archer's nice enough to give them this last moment. Yep. I get okay, so this is like him keeping his dream alive through Waver, even if he physically isn't here anymore. Persepolis! Hmm. Yeah, so for him, it was always about it's not about actually reaching your goal necessarily, even though that would be nice. It's about the process and the attitude towards constantly driving towards that goal, I guess. This is classic, like riding towards your death and being shot relentlessly with infinite projectiles. It's like that last samurai scene. It's the only way, like, that he could go. Maybe if he gets one cut. Ah, oh, man. Not even a cut on that face. My god. The symbolism of being stabbed with an anti-world, the anti-world like thing. Oceanus. He'll leave Waver alone because there was a moment there of respect from Archer. Yeah. Right? Maybe in another Grail War, but hopefully there isn't not another Great War. Right? What was that like? sparkly sound. Oh man, I bet Archer's like, if only I had one of these. A subject, just one subject, like Waver. But he never will because he doesn't make friends with his subjects. Hey. Oh, oh my gosh, just quoting from the Bible. Ah. All right, so we're heading towards the final fight between Kirei and Kitetsugu, which I guess we'll talk about next time. I feel really good is not the right term, just but really satisfied with how that battle between Archer and Ryder went down. Because even though Ryder obviously was shot through with a bunch of Archer's weapons and ultimately defeated and never actually accomplished his goal of winning, despite despite Waver gifting him with 3 command seals simultaneously and ordering him that he was not allowed to fail, he, in a roundabout way, or in the way that really mattered, Ryder actually won the day, I'd say. He was able to pass his dream on to Waver, who no longer was his master, but a loyal, die-hard subject who he can count on to keep his dream alive, his dream of conquering the world. And he was able to die in the way that respected and fully displayed his entire philosophy or philosophical outlook on life. You know, dying with no regrets, going full on out, and in the process earning Archer's respect. You know, after that final stab, they had this little moment, right, where Archer was like, "You're welcome to play in my garden," or something. You know, like, you will never be bored of this world, which I own, but I respect you enough to invite you to challenge me as many times as you like, because obviously maybe there's like reincarnation through future Great Wars, whatever. And Ryder's like, yeah, that's pretty much my whole existence, is forever chasing that impossible dream. Yeah, I think Ryder's story or his life ended in probably the best way given the setup of the Grail War. Going back to Saber and her finding out that Berserker is actually Lancelot and her not understanding why he would sink to the depths of taking on the Berserker class. Yeah, it was fascinating that they went back to playing Ryder's criticisms of her in that moment in her head. The whole, you have a subject now, Lancelot, who is bent on destroying you and taking revenge on you because, quote unquote, you didn't lead them. I don't know. You guys help me understand that a bit more. I guess I understand that, you know, it was probably because Saber, due to her rigid following of the code or her internal ideas of what justice entails, maybe neglected the more compassionate or the more human side of ruling. And that led to this whole situation with Lancelot potentially where there could have been ways of dealing with Lancelot's betrayal short of absolutely cutting him off. But then on the other hand, just again, based on what the legend says occurred, which is the whole Lancelot having an affair with Guinevere, I also don't see how King Arthur had any other choice other than to go down that path, because if a subject of yours betrays you in such an egregious manner, back in those days, it would have been a sign of weakness, I would assume, to take a more compassionate approach to your judgment of their actions. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. There's some twist on it that I'm sure makes sense, but I still am not totally 100% convinced that that lesson applies to Saber and the situation with Lancelot, at least. Maybe there are just a lot of other situations where Saber put rigid rules over compassionate and humane rule, and that cost her subjects' loyalty. Kariya, I don't know what to say about Kariya. There's not really much to say about Kariya at this point, other than he's a mess and he has nothing to live for anyway, given that even if he saves Sakura, I mean, I guess that would be some balm onto his absolutely depressing existence. But even then, every time he looks at Sakura, he would be reminded of what he did to Aoi, and there's no forgiving that. Certainly, I don't think he could ever forgive himself. Yeah, I really don't see a way out for Kariya in all of this. So I guess next time it's going to be Kiritsugu and Kirei, which this whole 2 seasons have been building up to. Let me know your thoughts. I have a lot to process and we'll probably have a lot more to say next time. But yeah, thank you guys for being so patient and for joining me again on this watch along, and I will see you next time for the second last episode of Fate Zero.